This week, we watched the Royal Rumble. We saw Sweeney Todd on Broadway, but the real barber is Vince McMahon. And now your host, Mike Indeglio.
I see what you did there. Welcome to K&M Geekly. My name is Mike Indeglio. This is just a sneak peek at two geeks talking about some of the things that got them through their week, and I'm joined, as always, by my Beetle Bamford, Keith Varney. How you doing this week, Keith?
I'm doing okay. I'm wearing a hat for the first time. I think this might be a new record, but I took a shower last night, and we're recording this at like 11 something in the morning. I'm like, I'm not going to take another shower, but also like I'm not going to subject you to this.
Yeah.
So thus the hat.
There was a funny sketch on SNL. It wasn't funny. There was a sketch on SNL last night that I spoke to me, Keith, and it was basically all the football analysts. And they were talking about how after today, which is the AFC and NFC championship games, there's no real football because the Super Bowl isn't for us. Super Bowl is for commercials and all that kind of stuff. This is the last the last game, they said, for just us guys. And I thought the premise was pretty funny. But here we are on the final football Sunday. We did some wrestling watching last night. My brother and my mom was here. My brother was here. He brought his wife. My wife came home from... And we watched just all the hours of wrestling. We're going to talk about that this week. If you're not a wrestling fan, make sure to check out the timestamps. As usual, they will tell you when we are going to gab. Lots of interesting things because there's other news in the week about monsters, and we're going to talk about it.
Boy, is that for sure.
And we're not going to kid glove it, I don't think. We might as well get down to the brass tacks of it because it's easy. We do joke a lot on the show, and I think when it's time to be serious, we are.
No, there's absolutely nothing funny about about Vince McMahon.
But before we do that, let's talk about a musical comedy, Keith.
Yes.
And as you can see, the AI has made us a glorious background this week. And, you know, I don't know that we've ever talked about our mutual geeking love for Sweeney Todd. I know we saw Sweeney Todd this week. Let me just pivot.
We saw Sweeney Todd on Broadway, the latest revival at the Lunt-Fontanne Theater.
Yes, which we had been wanting to do, though this was a much ballyhooed production. It was starring Annaleigh Ashford and Josh Groban. But, Keith, deal watchers, as we've often talked on the show, rather than spend the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars or win that lottery to get to see those two.
And by deal watchers, you mean poor people like us.
We decided to just wait until they left. And in the interim on Broadway, before
Aaron Tveit and... is it Tveit or Tveit?
I've always said Tveit, but I just don't know. I don't know him.
I'm like I was in a fantasy baseball league with him, but I still don't know how to pronounce his name.
Well, I don't think it's a prerequisite to know everybody's name.
Well, you'd think.
Yes, and I'm sure they will be wonderful, but we weren't going to wait for those prices either, so we got the interim, and so we got to see who are our stars that we saw, Keith. Nicholas...
hold on.
Sparks?
Nicholas Sparks! Yes, of course. Nicholas Sparks, Nicholas Christopher, and Delaney Westfall as Mrs. Lovett.
Yes. So there's so many things to talk about. First, let's get our just general impressions of the show. I'll go first. Keith and I going in as we were sitting there talking. I guess I didn't realize until my wife brought it up to me how just giddy I was. I was giddy waiting to go.
I've never seen Mike as geeked up as before the show. The three of us went together.
Yes.
And like Mike was vibrating in his seat. It was delightful. I loved seeing like Mike setting aside his like, yeah, cool guy, yeah, man, whatever. And just being genuinely geeked up for a show.
Yeah, and it's you know, the further I'm away from like the meat of my doing this on stage career, the more I found myself being able to not just turn off the part of my brain that sees all the work from the actors, the work from the designer. You know, I'm able to kind of segment that better, which I find leads to much more enjoyment. This show specifically because Keith and I talked about this when I was in 6th grade. The first show I ever saw, my mom took me to a production of Pirates of Penzance, which was wonderful. And I was very little, and I just remember the sort of just the whimsy and the joy of that. But in 6th grade, I had a music teacher, Mrs. Nutter, and you know, in 5th and 6th grade were really important things because I had another music teacher, Mrs. Carney, who made us learn some chords on the guitar, and that forever changed my life. Just this decision to make us learn a couple we learned a couple chords on the piano. The what's the thing? The harmonia? No, what's the like harps where you press the buttons? No, you press the buttons and then strum the string, and then like it's lays flat. Joni Mitchell played it a lot. Auto harp.
Auto harp. Yeah, I think. Yeah.
Anyway, a bunch of different instruments, and that exploration of instruments changed my life, or at least introduced me to that part of my life. And then Mrs. Nutter in 6th grade said, okay, for the next week, because music classes were shorter than the regular classes. They wouldn't get the full 45 minutes. It was like a 32-minute elective or something like that. Yeah, it was weird. Anyway, she's like, we're going to break up a musical. We're going to show you musical theater, and we're going to break it up. And they didn't show us, Joseph or Les Mis or any of the things, that there were VHSs of. We got the PBS 1983 George Hearn,
82. Yeah.
Angela Lansbury Broadway touring company.
They showed you Sweeney in 6th grade.
6th grade, and the whole thing. We talked about it. We talked about writing lyrics. We talked about music. We talked about the use of the horror genre. We just had she talked to us like we were students of the theater when we were in 6th grade, and it was freaking awesome. It was frightening. It was exciting. It was it was probably my first introduction to music that wasn't just like happy modal pop music,
Right, sure.
It's challenging. It's a challenging score. It's a challenging story. And I absolutely loved it and went on. I remember one of my first big things is I was able to convince my parents to buy me the VHS, and I wore that thing out. Or maybe we taped it off of PBS. I can't remember which of the two.
It gets interrupted by a pledge drive pretty frequently.
For so long. Anyway, I've seen a couple productions live subsequently, and I've watched every other one. I've rarely missed one. Anyway, I was so excited to see this, Keith. And for the very most part, I absolutely adored it. I think for me, the standout was that it was approached a little less. I mean, it's supposed to be a sort of gigantic gothic horror melodrama, and
it's almost a comic book originally. Yeah.
Very pulpy, and they grounded this a lot more than I wouldn't say that is usually done. That is just that is in juxtaposition to what we're used to. Yeah, I thought it was a really interesting use of space. There's a lot of negative space, whereas the Harold Prince original production was just there was set and people everywhere. Everything was filled. It was cacophony, right? Very much like London would have been. And I thought the voices were incredible. I thought the leads were doing yeoman's work because, as Keith and I will mention, they were not just like the standbys. They also played other roles when the big quote-unquote name stars were in. It just was, I saw there were some interesting takes on Joanna, some interesting takes. I thought this was one of the best Tobys I've ever seen, and a great take on the judge. Just a great overall production. I had so much fun. It did not disappoint me like sometimes when you meet your idols, it can do. And we got to hear the full-on, bang-on Stephen Sondheim's score, which is
a full orchestra for the first time on Broadway in a while.
And we had great seats, I thought. We had pretty great seats for what
seats
we paid for them. So that was my overall thoughts before we get into the nitty-gritty. Keith, what were yours?
Yeah, I mean, I said this as we were talking after the show. Sweeney Todd is a unparalleled masterpiece of musical theater. I think it is, and I don't think that's a particularly wild statement. Everybody agrees it was not successful in the original production, nor was it particularly well reviewed, if you'd believe that. But again, time and distance and context really does change things. So those initial reviews, don't always trust them.
Yeah.
It is an absolute masterpiece of writing, of creativity, of unique genre storytelling. The score is absolutely pitch perfect. It is complex. It is challenging. It is tuneful. It is clever, and it's heartbreaking. And it is an absolutely. I think it's one of the top 5 examples of this art form in human history, and I think it's going to stand up that way. I mean, we talk about musical theater writers, and some people are popular for a while, some people are successful or whatever. I don't think I'm going out of my way to say that Stephen Sondheim is kind of like a Mozart And in 400 years, we will still be analyzing and enjoying his music like Mozart, whereas a lot of it will sort of like come and go, and it will be a part of what was successful for a moment. But he's one of those towering minds that defines 100 years of theater and in composition. So if you look at the 20th century, you've got like Sondheim and Bernstein and like the Beatles, that kind of the people that will endure forever. And this is one of those shows. And so I also was raised on the 1982 Lansbury production with George Hearn, who was actually the first replacement, who went out on the tour. They filmed the tour. It was not the Broadway production. It was in Los Angeles. Anyway, I was raised on it as well. Much the same as you. I had my VHS of Sweeney, of Into the Woods, and Sunday in the Park. And those were my three that went in rotation constantly. And so talk about meeting your heroes. Like when I start meeting people who are in those productions, I'm like, and
you want to be cool and not ask them a million questions, but you can't help it.
Oh my God. And like some of them like don't want to talk about it. Some of them like love talking about it. Like talk to Chip. Chip's like loves talking about it. But like when I first met George Hearn, I was like, I'm like, I'm trying to play it cool. I can't play it cool. Anyway, yeah, I think it's a really good production. I think that there's a part of me that missed a little bit of the comic book. If you look at the original production, their makeup, it was almost kabuki. Like it was wildly stylized and giant. And this is a much more grounded, much more realistic version of these characters, which I thought played great. But there's something about me that wants my Sweeney to be chewing the stage.
Yep.
And look, I thought, this, I don't think everybody knows this, especially these days, but like, when the star is out, you are not getting a lesser performance. Both of these actors came in and were fantastic and just absolutely rock solid, and worth every penny. So, if you have an opportunity to see the show, and we saw it for what, $60 in the orchestra. Yeah. I mean, come on, it's fantastic. Don't miss out on an opportunity like that. So, yeah, I really liked the physical production was great. For me, I just want to hear the full orchestra and I want to hear the screaming, Sweeney! And I want to be blown away by that. And one thing that you picked up on right away in the theater, which I thought was really interesting, is that the sound design of the show very specifically made the sound come from the stage. Whereas a lot of these shows, there are speakers all over, and you get sort of it's fuller, it's a little louder, but you don't have the sense of direction because it's a flatter sound and it doesn't feel quite as live because you're not hearing it from the stage. And so I think with this intentionally, the sound design is very clearly the sound is coming from the people on the stage. And there's some pros and cons to that, right? Because I think it really did help with the realism. It helped draw us into it. It could have been louder for me. Not that I couldn't hear anything, but those big, overwhelming, operatic horror things, I want to be louder a little bit. And maybe that could have been where we were sitting. The Lunch Fontaine has a giant mezzanine which overlaps most of the orchestra. So if you're under it, I think you might lose a little bit of sound that if you were up in the mezzanine, you might get a little bit more. Who knows? But it's an absolutely rock solid production. I'm really glad that they decided to do a big Sweeney, because we've seen many productions of it, and lately it's been pretty small to save money. And the show holds up, big or small, but just to get that, really enjoyed that.
Yeah, you bring up some interesting philosophical points about art, and one is that musical theater, amongst many art forms, but is such a collaborative alchemy, right? A final production. It's not just obviously the fingerprints of Harold Prince and Stephen Sondheim are all over that original production, but it still takes every individual's voice, every individual instrumentation, the orchestration, the guy who wrote the orchestra. It all has to come together.
Sets, costumes, makeup. We've mentioned all of those today.
And when it does so perfectly, as two things end up happening. It still grows and becomes better as time goes on, right? A lot of art, we're watching Deep Space Nine, a lot of television, a lot of different things you watch, and 20 years later, 30 years later, and what you ask is, does this hold up? Will it hold up? Is the formative question. That's never a question. It's not, will it hold up? Is it, can this production touch the original? Right? You never, not even surpass, just can this production even measure up? It's not hold up. Will the piece hold up? The piece is perfect. Yeah. Will the production hold up?
In this case, and sometimes the subsequent production is better than the original and is finally made. Mm-hmm. I mean, the Merrily We Roll Along revival, also a Sondheim show. I have not seen it yet, but the consensus is they finally got it right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because maybe because the recipe was off, right? The soup recipe, the secret recipe, there's a missing ingredient, and you got to discover what that is. Yep. And sometimes I think directors overthink themselves, right? When you have a perfect piece, you don't have to always put your fingerprint on it. I'll bring up, and I'm not even saying I disliked it. I'm just saying I'll bring up the very specific Johnny Depp, Tim Burton film version of this piece. They messed with the recipe a lot, right? It's very much Tim Burton's fever dream of what this story is. A lot of the music's changed. A lot of the music's cut. A lot of the story is altered. And that's not a judgment. That's just when you mess with the ingredients of the soup, right? When you what's the word?
When you order off the menu?
Yeah, with those
when you substitute.
Yeah. Or when you have you go to a fancy place and it's like the deconstruction of a burger and you're like, oh man, well, you can't really, burger and fries works pretty good, right?
Yeah,
I don't need it on in a soup. So anyway, I thought this was really great, and
that is fine, worth it,
and awesome to remember that not everybody knows this stuff. Like when you learn, spoiler alert for Sweeney Todd, that he's gonna eat people. They're gonna eat people, or feed people to people.
Oh, they eat them.
Yeah, it's people were gasping, and I was like, oh,
it's pretty hilarious to not know that, but that is the wonder of storytelling and theater, is that a new generation comes by that hasn't seen it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and that's the thing. I bet for the people who did these iconic filmed shows, right? People our age are going to geek out to them, but a 25-year-old musical theater fan might not have any idea who any of these people are, because they weren't raised on these.
Nope. And it's cool to see that you can still get the DVD, the original DVD. I mean, we saw this.
But you're going to put in Dropbox, right? I was kind of waiting for that.
Yeah, well, results are not as great. I think I'll just put the original in there because you can't really clean it up. It is what it is. It's like 360 by 180. Like the pixel density is very bad, but
it's very bad.
It is what it is. So yeah, I'll pop it in there for you. And also, I went on a fun journey, and so has Keith, like on YouTube, to see all kinds of hidden. Somehow there are versions of Len Carew doing it, doing it, filmed from the orchestra somehow with some technology.
Boots, but no, somebody went in with like a huge camcorder and nobody noticed.
It's like, this is my wife, and it's just like a big coat.
Just put a coat on a TV
camera. We had a blast, and then because we're dorks, we sat in a restaurant afterwards and talked about it. It was just like a ton of fun.
Super fun.
If you get it, it's going to be running for a while, so if you get a chance to go check it out, and if not, Amazon Prime, it's $3.60 to rent the original. So just go and do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so next, let's talk about the other just giant geek thing we did last night, and that was virtually watch the Royal Rumble, which is the official start to the road to WrestleMania, folks, for WWE Wrestling. A lot of times, there's a lot of surprises and twists and turns, because the winner of these matches gets to face the champion at WrestleMania in April. My brother came over with his wife, as I mentioned. We got some chips. Keith was on the text. We're texting constantly.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'll pitch to you first, buddy. What were your just general thoughts of the show and your feelings? First of all, it's just still too long. It started at 7. After the press conference, my brother left at 1 o'clock. That is 5 hours of stuff. but is what it is.
Yeah, well, but my first thought is looking at the poster here. Multiple people on this poster were not a part of this evening whatsoever.
Yeah.
But I guess that's I guess that's part of the mystery of the Royal Rumble. Who's going to come out next?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so it doesn't matter for people watching this, but what makes the Royal Rumble fun is they have this match where they keep having more and more people coming out into the ring and they have to fight or whatever. But like the point is, like, you end up having 30 different people come in every 90 seconds, and it's always a surprise. You don't know who's going to come out next. It could be your stars of today. You could have somebody surprise come out from 20 years ago, and like, you just never know what's going to happen, and that's really fun. And it has some good stakes because whoever wins is going to headline WrestleMania. So super fun. I think this is my favorite pay-per-view.
Mm-hmm.
Not this particular one, but the Royal Rumble in general is, I think, my favorite format for the pay-per-view. So it was fun. Like, I don't think it was like a barn burner at all. I thought it was, they told the stories. I thought a lot of the work was good. They introduced some folks. Cody Rhodes won, so he's going to face Roman in the rematch in WrestleMania, which I'm excited about because I know that there's been lots of speculation about The Rock coming in, which is exciting to see Rock versus Roman for sure. But I think it's just very ill-timed because the Cody Rhodes story, they kind of have to finish it or not.
Yep.
And I don't think they're going to punt. So it's time. It's time for him to win and take over, and then The Rock and Roman can do SummerSlam or something.
The more I've thought about this overnight, and I guess we'll spare the nitty gritty of it. That would be for my brother, and I think the big picture is that this whole thing took place under three giant pillars, right? It took place under the auspice of a giant sell to part of this, of TKO selling the Monday Night Raw show to Netflix for $5 billion. So
Good Lord.
Huge content and viewership change. It came under the giant dragon of an elephant of the Vince McMahon sex scandal stuff, which we're going to talk about.
We will definitely get into, yeah.
And so how do you, as a company who has to continue to produce content, deal with that, put on a show, and yet...
Which dropped like
hours,
24 hours before this happened.
And establish... Because you know the questions that are coming, and so you have to somehow tell a story within the story you're already telling about where you're going, how you're going to go there. How are you going to talk about it, not talk about it, deal with it, not deal with it. And I have some ideas about what I interpreted from the show. And also then... you've got to then move on from that, right? You've got to show kind of what is the future, right? What is the impact of what has happened? And that they kind of do in the post-press conference, which is generally a shoot, which is, it's not like in the characters. They're talking sort of from a business aspect. And I thought it was actually pretty interesting last night. Some interesting tidbits. So, all of that said, my interpretation of the event as a whole, Keith, you can comment on it, then we'll get to the news.
Yeah.
I think they were saying, look, wrestling has been for the past kind of few years getting more and more controlled by either Vince McMahon and his random creative whims, pushing things people weren't into, storylines they weren't into, not finishing things they had set up, just kind of being all over the place. His big thing was at the last minute, he could pull a big swerve and that would keep things exciting.
It was chaotic. Yeah.
And that started to run its course because people who were getting invested in this sort of day-to-day soap opera of it all were being left completely unsatisfied, or disappointed because people that they have grassroots cheered up then don't get the lauding. And I think what last night said was, hey guys, we're out from under that. We have set up a bunch of storylines, and even though the predictable ending of a lot of these matches may be set in stone because we know where the story's going,
right?
We're just going to tell them, and we're going to tell them with care. We're going to focus on them. We're going to dedicate ourselves to them, and that's what they did. Cody Rhodes won, and yet he did so in, I thought, a pretty exciting fashion that still kept, CM Punk looking strong and other stories set up. Plenty of other storylines like that. So I think that's what I took from it. They were like, yeah, there's no big exciting entrances. The Rock didn't come.
Right.
And I think they shied away from a lot of the history stuff. Like, we're not going to bring in
Yeah.
people from the old days. We're going to just say, these are our guys now. This is where we're going.
Yeah.
That's what we're focused on. And
it was very meat and potatoes.
Yeah.
And I think probably smart.
Yeah. And though, like, people who just kind of pip and pop watch, like me, that I'm usually looking for the exciting stuff because I don't know all of the ongoing stories, I'd still rather a company say, hey, this is our book, read it or don't read it. But we're not just going to change everything at the pay-per-views because we want to excite you, Mike. So good for them, I say. Now,
yeah.
Here's the thing. The press conference comes, and I have to tip my hat to Cody Rhodes because
he was
went
the
out
only
there
one who like addressed it directly,
and he got asked a point blank question, and he did not shy away. He was like, "It's scary. It sucks."
So we should back up and give a little context. So for those people who are not in the wrestling nerd fandom, Vince McMahon, this is his company. He basically he inherited it from his father, but he took it from a little regional territory and made it this gigantic mega corporation. He basically took over all the other companies in the world and consolidated it into this giant thing. He has been the face of professional wrestling for 30, 40 years now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And has been a relatively hated / begrudgingly respected figure who has his hands on literally everything that wrestling has been since the 80s.
Yeah.
He also has a long history of pretty monstrous behavior and, allegations that, like, starting back in like 1982, allegations that he paid off the cops to get rid of one of his top wrestler at that point who just murdered a woman. There's been a long history of sexual misconduct allegations that both he participated in and or covered up. He has he continued a pay-per-view after he literally got one of his wrestlers killed in the ring and then forced everybody to continue the pay-per-view. He's basically, he's like BFS with Donald Trump. That should tell you everything you need to know. But basically, he has been a monster for a very, very long time.
Yeah, I just generally the type of things, you can go and read it on the internet. We don't have to like get into the salacious stuff, but I'll say that the closest, if you basically take the R. Kelly scandal in the music industry and all of the sort of sexually depraved type of like weird trafficking and imprisonment stuff that he's been accused of and found guilty of, and mix that with like the Epstein super rich, I can do anything sexually, not like with employment and NDAs and all the business kind of stuff, and mix those two into a weird testosterone fueled soup. That's this.
And mixed with like P.T. Barnum's desperation for attention and putting himself in the face. So anyway, 2 days ago, some allegations were a lawsuit came out and about this woman who he basically like trafficked and abused for years. And this isn't something that happened like 20 years ago. This happened like 2 years ago. That came out and with a lot of just details that will, oh my God, like just imagine the most horrific thing you can possibly do, passing it around to other employees, passing or around to wrestlers. It's absolutely barbaric and horrific. And I think this finally is going to put the nail in the McMahon coffin because, a couple of years ago, he was temporarily pushed out because they found out about all these payoffs he'd been making. Now, of course, he's been accused of rape as far back as early 90s. But he was able to force his way back in. I think this is going to end it, thankfully. And he should be ending up in prison. And I think, billionaires being barbaric is not necessarily a surprise to anybody. And to think that there's dark stuff happening in professional wrestling, that's also not breaking any news. But I think to sort of speak about what everybody hasn't talked about yet is I think the implications on this moving forward. I think it's really tough. And I think it gets into some of the ethics that I struggle with as a wrestling fan and as a fan of a lot of these people and this eras and you know, the complicity of everyone in this industry. Like it's not like this was a big secret.
Mhm.
Everybody knew I don't think people knew quite the extent of the barbarism, but there was plenty enough there that choosing to participate in this environment that was so toxic and so abusive, you know, and it's going to touch a lot more people than we're aware of yet. I mean, obviously, you read between the lines the allegation that, of course, like it's Brock Lesnar was a participant in this. One of the biggest wrestling stars in the world continues to be. You know, McMahon and Laurinaitis obviously are named in this, but it's not just them. And you know it's going to trickle down and it's going to break some hearts when we find out who else, you know, may have participated in it, may have been aware of it, may have looked the other way. And like it takes a lot to cover up this type of a thing. And there's been so many cover-ups in this industry, and it's really, really dark and really, really upsetting. And, you know, it challenges me, right? Like, oh, how do I participate in this? How do I enjoy? How do I, as a fan? Because what happened to me, right? My wrestling fandom story was I actually started with the dark side. I started watching Dark Side of the Ring and was like, oh my God, I can't believe how awful this whole world is and all these terrible things that are happening. And then it freaking sucked me in. And I became a fan starting from the standpoint of this is like a monstrous thing that's happening. And then, but it really does suck you in. It's this crazy, bizarre, carny art form that it's
and especially
and here we are.
If you're nostalgia based in it, and I am very much nostalgia based in it, and
Sure.
my brother was very professionally invested in it.
Was in the world,
yeah. You know, and hear about a lot of this stuff, and you know that all was going on when I was in love with the thing, but the thing is that complacency is. It is not the basis or the formulation or the reason you end up liking the thing, right? And so they get an opportunity to try to forge their own path. It took a while to get rid of them. It's a Weinstein situation, right? Look, you and I were in the arts, and for so many years you hear of the horror stories, friends of yours, the casting couch stuff, all of that ugly things. And
sure.
You never deny that it's happening or think it's not, think that the allegations are false. It's just that, oh, this is part of the bag, right? This is part of the business. And
what am I going to do about it? Because I think about it like it's actually a really good parallel. I was actually going to go there when you brought it up. Was us in the theater industry. Now we don't have quite the history of professional wrestling or anything, but I mean, did we know
so many
about
monsters?
Did we? Were we aware of Kevin Spacey before that one?
Yeah. Well,
of course
even in our little nook and corner of the musical theater, right there, it's terrible. And how many exposés have we secretly heard about, Keith, that never happened or we're gonna?
Right. And so like
because you see it happen in real time. The powers that be.
If you're in the business, right? Like, I mean, how many times have I sat down and talked with somebody who, you know, how they were treated by Scott Rudin 20 years before this broke, or somebody gets hit on by so-and-so.
Or forget the big guys, right? How many regional productions have I sat in on audition and heard the guy writing things, I'm trying to stay as vague as possible, writing stuff down that is writing horrific things in retrospect, but now I'm like, oh shit, I should have said something, but I was 22 years old and trying to be in the business, right?
Right. How many, we've heard of, witnessed.
And that's from two heterosexual white guys. So imagine the stories of people who are actually affected by this, right?
That's 100% true.
Privilege being checked. So point being, look, we all live in a wall of our own hypocrisy, and it is difficult. But I think, man, as trite as it sounds, step one is you ask the questions, Keith, right? It's like, do I want to continue to participate in being a fan of this? What can they do? And so let's piggyback. So under that cloud, they had this like press. I'm not going to call it a press conference because it's really just like some bloggers and stuff. The first one is like, okay, Joe Schmo from behind the bloody caged podcast.com. And you're like, okay, well, it's not Cronkite, but
You realize you're talking about us, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like if you lined up Jake Tapper and Keith Varney, I mean, one of them is going to probably ask a better question, and it's Keith.
True.
You know.
Yeah, obviously.
If it's you, if I had made the comparison between you and Steve Doocy, I'd say for sure Keith. But anyway, my point is, nobody was asking you anything. I was getting the impression that they were like, "You can't ask about this," but then somebody did. It felt a little like this guy's going to ask Cody, that guy's going to ask him, because there was only 2 questions they allowed, so it was interesting. Anyway, not the point. And Cody did not give a PR answer. He basically was like, "This is terrifying. Here's what I like about Cody Rhodes, and I've never been a giant Cody Rhodes fan, but it's clear to excel in any business, especially a performance-based one, you got to have a very specific ego. A lot of people have ugly egos who are just like cutthroat, they'll step on anybody to do anything. And then there's the certain few that have like a sort of very confidence-based, but still like a little arrogant. I can't quite define it, but he's very much, I'm the future. Yeah. So I'm going to make calls, I'm going to do things, I'm going to say things, and I'm going to start leading before I'm officially the leader.
But you also wonder how much of that is him playing his character versus him playing himself. But I think to define what you're looking for is that you have that. It's kind of like nobody wants to be president unless they have a towering ego. Yeah. Right. And nobody wants to be the face of professional wrestling unless you have this towering ego. But I think what Cody has, and I think that the best ones have, is like, yes, I have that ego. Yes, I have this like crazy ambition and I want to be on the poster, but I have a little bit of self-awareness. Mm-hmm. Like I'm aware of what's happening and why I'm doing it. And I think Cody has that. I think he's very bright. I mean, the reputation of professional wrestlers is that they're all really dumb. Mm-hmm. And look, some of them are, but most of the successful ones are very, very bright.
Especially at this stage of the game, because you have to market yourself, social media, the whole thing is just so much. So anyway, so he handled it fairly well and addressed it to a degree, and then, basically was trying to draw the line and say, we didn't know anything about this, and we're learning about it as you are, which I find just incredibly difficult to believe.
Well, and the best question that got asked was,
what are you doing?
What needs to happen to prevent this from happening in the future? And the answer is not what they did before, because they did an internal investigation, and I put that in the air quotiest of air quotes because it came out in this thing. They never even talked to the victim, who had all of the receipts, all of the text messages, all of it. They swept it under the rug, and so this is going to continue happening until they genuinely bring in. I mean, frankly, at this point, it's all criminal. And so, like, forget anything internal, forget anything with the company, the authorities, the FBI, whoever adjudicates these sort of things needs to come in and figure out anyone who has had any touch with this and clean house. And if you have to clean house of 80% of the people there, 80% of the do it. You have to.
This is one of those few times where, it's a choice between two evils, right? There are no superheroes that come and just make everybody good, the good guys, right? And no company and no entity is ever going to be full of just good guys, right? Like, it's like Google saying their main pillar on their company sort of ethics sheet is do no evil. First, do no evil. Don't be evil is their first thing. And you're like, oh, what the, like, great, that's great.
Sure.
But
yeah.
So listen, the choices here are, and I think the best thing that can happen to WWE, and has happened, is the corporatization of it, because it's a publicly shared company. Billions of dollars are being spent and traded and used. So at that point, people don't want to lose billions of dollars. And if criminal things are happening and it becomes difficult to cover up, generally speaking, they just expose it to get rid of those people. And so, listen, I'm not championing corporate America, but if the choices are insane dictator that runs every aspect of everything, or
running $1 billion family business,
or publicly traded billionaires, I'll take the cohort, because chances are that, like, at least somebody amongst them will realize, hey, we're going to lose money if insane dictator's still in power. Well, right?
Yes. I think that. I mean, I do see the benefits of that, But I think honestly, the only thing that's going to solve this permanently is external authorities coming in, that the people investigating this cannot have a corporate interest,
Mhm.
Cannot be financially motivated by what they're doing. They need to have, and that's the authorities, the FBI, whatever, whoever does this needs to come in and not give a crap about the next pay-per-view, not give a crap about the shareholders.
Which
Go
is
in with
the big
and
missed
shine a light on
opportunity.
this.
The big missed opportunity last night. Now listen, the current sort of head of the running the day to day of the company now is now
Talk about difficult.
is this guy Triple H, right? And his Paul, and he is married to the daughter of Vince McMahon. He has come up under the tutelage of Vince McMahon. I'm sure he was party to and aware of all this crap going on in the dead middle of it,
yeah.
and now has to answer for it for the company. And I just think I understand his line, which was just like, "Look, we're trying to celebrate the Royal Rumble. We don't have time to talk about that. It'll all come out in the wash. We're looking forward." I understand that from a PR perspective, totally understand it, but I think with the context and with the knowledge that he has, not only of like what actually transpired, but probably what wheels are in motion legally, financially, and all kinds of stuff.
Sure,
He should have
he can't
absolutely.
Really say anything.
What he basically said was, "We're doing everything we can." And I think he should have gone the extra step that Keith just said. I think he said, we're going to invite in any and all authorities. We're going to let every investigation run. We're going to take care of the people who are vile criminals, and they will not be a party to this. We will wipe them from the annals of our... Listen, when Hulk Hogan said the N-word, they came out and basically were like, we're going to wash him from this company. Now, of course, he's back. And it's Slim Jim.
He did the promo for this event.
Slim Jim was like, Vince McMahon is a disgusting slob. We're out as advertisers. And then the second Vince resigned, Slim Jim was like, we're snapping back in, baby.
It was like 12 hours later.
So, granted, but I'm just saying that he could have been forceful, whether he was going to, and he chose not to. And it stood out to me.
Of course. Well,
in juxtaposition to the way Cody handled it, which I thought they could have just.
Well, think about the ridiculous position.
Yeah, I get
that
it.
Paul is in,
but he's in it,
and because he's literally married to the daughter of this monster, who it seems like wants nothing to do with her father,
her
whatsoever.
son too, the rest of the family.
They want nothing to do with him, and understandably, Jesus. But I think all of that speaks to this needs to be investigated independently, and it has to be, and not like corporate independent, not fake independent, which is what they did last time. Like, oh, it's an independent, yeah, bullshit. It's an investigation. They need to bring in their worst enemy to come in and investigate this.
I wouldn't be surprised. Also, like, I don't think legally Paul probably could say anything.
No, well,
I'm sure he is well wrapped up in this investigation.
Of course, they all are, and so like, at this point, people shouldn't be worrying about their jobs. They should be worried about going to prison.
Yeah, that's the deepness of it. What I think the most interesting line was a line of omission, right? What you did not hear from anyone. I mean, you wouldn't, but maybe from Triple H, and you did not hear it, was because the internet's already doing it, right? Like, oh, well, the victim shaming. Well, what if she deserved it? What if it was this? Allegations, proven innocent, blah, blah, all that bullshit, which generally I support. But you didn't hear anyone from the company say that. You didn't hear anyone say, well, let's wait until all the facts.
No one said a word about the victim at all.
True. Very fair. But they didn't defend anyone, and which speaks volumes towards the kind of ubiquity of what we all know.
Well, if you read the lawsuit, there's no, like, she has all the receipts. Just read the text. It's all there. It's all, and it's also all in keeping with a pattern that we all have known about for 40 years. Like this is not out of the blue. This is like, duh, of course.
Yeah, listen. The question, Will the circus survive if you take elephants away, Keith? If we stop torturing animals? Well, guess what? Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
And how long did we fight that war? And I'm sorry if that feels like a trite analogy, but my point is that the
No,
art,
but I think it is.
yeah, the art form is bigger than the guy.
It doesn't need to involve torture of the wrestlers, tortures of the people around them. It doesn't need to be toxic. It doesn't need to be an abusive, monstrous thing. And frankly, it always has been. Like every promotion going back to, when this got invented by carnies in the teens, right? Like it has always been ripe for abuse and exploitation and just horror. It doesn't need to be. Like,
yeah, I mean, till a couple years ago, and maybe still ongoing. I mean, unless you're at the top game, like the top draws at the WWE or whatever, professional wrestling seems like this big umbrella, but the majority of these guys are independent contractors, don't even have insurance. They don't even barely get paid. I mean, a lot of the independent shows you go to, they're still making $50 to roll in there. So,
yeah.
Just because they just got $5 billion to be on Monday Night Raw, don't think that any of those billions trickle down to those guys on Monday Night Raw.
Just because Hugh Jackman was making $1 million a week on Broadway doesn't mean that everyone trying to be a musical theater performer is making any money.
That's these misnomers. It's so funny. People think, oh, the Hollywood elite, blah blah blah. I was like, there's the 1% of those elite too. My wife, she had a great comment, and I'm going to butcher it, and I'm not trying to be downplay Jen's awards and successes and all of that, but she was just doing an off-Broadway show recently with some people with huge Broadway credits, and it was just like a really hard elite place to be to get any job, right, in the theater.
Yeah.
And she's like, hey, nobody told me the dream when I was 22 years old was to be living in your brother's daughter's bedroom while she's off at college, commuting 3 hours to do a job for $700. And you're like, it is. That's the dream.
And that's it. Really, I mean, that's the thing. Like even a Broadway actor who is working reasonably consistently, it is a middle class at best.
Yeah. For as long as, and it's an at-will job. Oh, but you got a year contract. Yeah, but that show could, look, we have Friends in Harmony. That thing ran for 4 months, man. Yeah. Your big dream came true, and 4 months. You're lucky if you put enough money away to,
And that's more, and that is more likely to be the story than less likely, for sure. Well, anyway, much yet to be adjudicated, and I think we're just, I think my last thought on it is, hopefully, this will finally be the light that we can really shine on that whole empire, the McMahon abuse empire. But I think if we shine a light on it, this is going to be the first layer of the onion, and there be monsters, and I think we are all going to be heartbroken by somebody's involvement. I don't know if you're a big Brock Lesnar fan. Get ready to have your heart broken, and who knows who else is on that list. So,
well, I mean, maybe we're entering an era, Keith, to be sunshine and rainbow about it, of some sort of accountability for these people.
Yes.
For the billionaires.
Please, finally.
I don't care at this point. It's weird. It's like me sometimes I watch weird videos of kids growing up and buying their dad a car that he sold to get them, when they're or I watch videos of people getting pulled over after they do stupid things. I drive just because you want to feel like there's some sort of justice happening somewhere. That's how I feel. So, I mean, let's slay some dragons. Please, somebody get some dragons. I mean, some more $83 million judgments, right? But let's do some more of that.
Let's live in a world of accountability, please.
All right. Any positive thoughts, Keith? Let's do some weekly rab before we say goodnight. Anything you're looking forward to this week or fun things happening?
Oh, well, I don't know if I don't think I mentioned it last time, but I had my reading of my show, and it went really well. And so who knows what's going to happen with that, but I had a wonderful time re-excavating that. So I'm in a place of hopefulness about the life of some of the stuff that I'm creating. So as I've said before, I count my chickens when they have hatched, grown up, hatched eggs of their own, been cooked, eaten, and composted. that's when I'll count them.
Yeah.
But I certainly am in an optimistic place with that.
Yeah, I'm. This week is just kind of like back to the grind, but coming up some fun stuff. I'm taking Jen to see Billy Joel coming up, and
fun.
yeah, we went to see Sweeney Todd, and we the live performance is back, folks. I know that it's still scary out there with the diseases and the such, but a lot of shows are closing. Things are struggling. People are still struggling. If you're not Taylor Swift, right?
Yeah.
People are still struggling to get butts in the buckets. So you know what? Invest in a good mask. Force yourself to go out and go see some stuff, even if it's just the movies. There's some cool things happen. So, okay, there you have it. Until we talk again, listen, don't let anybody yuck your yum or do anything terrible to you. Speak up, speak out if you know of anything happening. Keep on doing the things you find fun, otherwise that are safe, and keep on geeking on. Wow, really. My lawyer told me to say those words.
Woo! Really landed it.